Creative writing. Some people love it.
I just died on your arms tonight.
Some people hate it.
Oh, I hate you.
Some people feel that they don't have any creativity or imagination, and some people feel that they've got loads of creativity and loads of imagination, yet still aren't getting good marks. So what I'm going to run through in this video is a formula that I've come up with to guarantee you marks. 100% it will get you better marks.
King in the castle, king in the castle.
And I know that because I've been doing this strategy with students for about 2 or 3 years now, and they've all seen a massive improvement in their creative writing marks. So what I'm going to run through is creating a story that you can replicate in the exam, which is going to take away the pressure of you having to come up with something on the spot. We're actually going to write a story that you can use in any condition that the exam gives you. Whatever the question is, you're going to be able to get marks. So stick with it through the video. It's quite a long one because I'm going to use an example from one of my past students. I'm going to read through it. I'm going to show you why it got marks and how that formula worked in order to get the marks. So stick with it. And if you're new to the channel, if this is the first video you've ever watched, thank you so much for clicking on it. If you do enjoy it and if you do find something helpful, please do consider subscribing to the channel and put a like on the video. And with that said, let's crack on. Let's go through it. Okay, so creative writing. Why aren't my marks getting better? And here are the 4 things that often people kind of struggle to kind of understand in order to help them get marks. So the first thing is like, I think I'm all right at it, but my marks suck. And that can feel really bad when it's something you kind of enjoy doing and something you feel that you should be good at. You've been good at writing stories since you were younger, but the marks aren't good. We're going to tackle that. Secondly, I don't understand how to be really descriptive. Again, you can kind of feel like, well, I mean, I can describe what the room looks like, but why aren't I getting marks? And it might be because you're not describing it using interesting vocabulary, or there might be other ways of thinking about how you can describe something to make it feel a bit more interesting for the reader. Because you've got to think of that. Everything is really, it's got to be to do with the reader. How can I come up with something on the spot? Well, we're gonna tackle that. We're gonna take a huge amount of that out of the equation when you actually get to do the exam, because we're going to learn something that you can replicate. And finally, I'm not creative or imaginative. And again, we're going to fix that by working out what we can practice in order to specifically get better at the task set in the exam. Because I'm not going to try and turn you into a novel writer who can do it as a career. That might be something you want to do, but that's not really what the exam is trying to get you to be. The exam doesn't want you to be some like fancy novelist. It's really testing a very particular set of skills of how you can be descriptive. So that's the only thing we've got to beat. That's what we've got to win at. We don't need to necessarily be like novelists in order to get 40 out of 40 or whatever your exam board has that in the mark scheme, the set of marks. So writing good descriptions, there are 4 things I think that it's really important to just remember straight away. So one of my favorite phrases for good creative writing is show, don't tell. So what that means is to be descriptive and to give the reader a clear picture of what they should imagine and what the characters are feeling using the senses, which I'm going to come on to a little bit later. So really, rather than just telling me that there are these objects in the room, you should be trying to show me each individual object, how it looks, the colors involved in it, the weight of those objects, where precisely they're at in the room. That's a really good kind of way of thinking of being descriptive, to really show, don't just tell. Being creative. I use this strategy for a lot of people, this particular one, because if you think about it, as humans now, so much of what we consume in terms of like what we watch, like media, social media, films, TVs, computer games, whatever it might be, so much of that is visual. Like we're used to taking in information in a visual way. And we're particularly used to taking in stories in a visual way. Like, let's be honest, so many people nowadays do not read books. Like, that's just obvious. I'm sure we all kind of know that. A lot of people I work with will, if they're being honest, genuinely say, haven't read a book since I was like 8 or 9. And to be honest, I only started reading again like this year, casually. I've always had to read kind of as a teacher. I've had to read like the texts on the exam boards and stuff. But for me personally, as a casual reader, haven't done it literally since I was a kid. And that's the same for a lot of people, like particularly young people, because we can watch a film in an hour and a half, say, and we've consumed that story in that hour and a half. Whereas to read the book of the film, it might take us sort of 5, 6, 7, sometimes more hours. So if we're used to watching films, right, my idea is, why don't you write the film in your head of what you imagine your film of this story would look like, and then just translate the sort of pictures of it into your writing. Literally just try and write exactly what you can see. Because a lot of people sometimes feel like writing is much harder than kind of watching it. Well, try and watch it in your head, frame by frame, and then just translate it into words. Exactly what you saw in your head, try and put it into words. So next up, also remember to try and use language techniques on the being creative, because it's all right sort of just writing things down of what you're seeing in your head, but you've actually got to try and write them in an interesting way, which I talked about at the beginning, and that's where we want to try and use language techniques. Practice writing, number 3. So to avoid having to literally come up with something on the spot, try and practice writing a variety of stories and then revise all of them before your exam, because some might be useful for the question they give you, some might not. But the more you practice, like telling different stories, the more you'll have in your sort of library of stories that you can kind of read the question, work out, oh yeah, that story that I wrote about Jane doing whatever, like that's the one that's going to really fit this question. I'm just going to use that. So actually practice, and that can help take a lot of pressure off when it comes to the actual exam. And lastly, have a simple narrative. Use a simple story. Focus on a very short period of time in the character's life. Do not try and tell an epic story spanning days and years. Instead, focus on a short 30 seconds of their life, going into detail of that particular moment. I remember reading a couple of stories from some students a while back, and this student had written like a story that spanned the entire life of this character in sort of like 3 pages. And what it meant is that you never really got any detail of any real moments of this character's life. They just try to condense, 16 years worth of life into this very short amount of time. That's not a very good way of writing a story, because you're just not leaving yourself time to actually really explore the tiny details of the character's life. So instead of that, just focus on a tiny, tiny little amount of their life, that character's life, but go into a lot of detail, because that's going to feel like we're really in that moment with them. Ultimately, the amount of detail you go into in the story, we are going to become more connected with that world and more connected with that character, which ultimately is going to be the goal, because we want the reader to be engaged with the story that we're telling. And the only way they can feel engaged is if they feel a part of it. So going into detail can really help with that. So those are the 4 main things that I think we need to remember. We're going to kind of touch upon all of these as we go through this sort of template that I've come up with. So on this template, there are 2 things really that I've kind of come up with that just work. Number one is choosing a dystopian setting. I'll come on to that, what I mean by that in a minute. And the concept of using a flashback in your story, integrating a flashback, making it that every story you write will have a flashback in the middle of it. I will go into that in way more detail when we start looking at the structure that I've come up with. So what is dystopian? A lot of schools actually do tackle this, sometimes in year 8 and year 9 when they start showing short stories and things like that. They often do like writing exercises with the dystopian setting, and I think it's a really, really good setting. What is it though? It's a world that is fundamentally different from our own. It's a world where everything has changed for the worse. It's something that we can recognize as our world, as Earth, but everything is kind of flipped upside down. Any TV show or movie that is set after some sort of apocalyptic event is dystopian. So, you know, any zombie movies or TV shows are dystopian, like The Walking Dead or something like that. We would call those dystopian because the world we know has completely changed, and it's changed for the worst. This setting, this is one of the reasons why I think it's a really, really good setting to always write your stories in, is the setting allows us to be very creative. Because think about it, no examiner reading your story once you've submitted it and you've done the exam has lived in this dystopian world. So you have complete creative freedom to write it however you want, and it will be new for them. By putting in your own little touches, your own little like bits of flair, you can make it completely new for them. They haven't lived it. Like if you set a story in sort of like London, for example, in modern day London, well, there's a good chance that quite a lot of people who could be marking your work have lived a day in London. So it's hard to kind of be fresh and new and exciting and different if you are writing in a setting that the reader has probably experienced. I would try and go the opposite of that, because then it's got a better chance of feeling new and exciting, and that's going to engage the reader more. And honestly, with that, as I've said, like, we can truly make that whatever we want it to be. We have complete creative freedom because no one lives in this dystopian world. Like we haven't really ever lived in that kind of world. So that is my idea of the setting, a dystopian setting, because it gives us so many options. But I'll go into it in a bit more detail in a minute. The flashback, right? The template, that 100% works. I promise you that. I've actually got a list of 20 edXL questions at the end of this document. And you can actually look at those 20 questions and go, right, okay, I know that I've got to have a dystopian setting. I'm going to have a flashback. Would it work for all of these 20 questions? And these are actually 20 past paper questions. And I did this exercise and it worked on every single one. So I know that it works. Here is the structure. Paragraph number 1. We're going to start the story in a dystopian world where we focus purely on describing the setting. Because think about it. You've got to start with the setting so that the reader can imagine the world that they're in. So they've got a starting place. You could start with the character, sure, and then sort of zoom out so we see the setting. Absolutely fine. I just think it's simpler for you to start with the setting. It just makes it a bit easier. So our goal in paragraph 1 is to focus purely on describing the location and everything the reader should see around them. So it could be things like nature, buildings, people, transport, sky, the ground, could be anything. Whatever you want to create in your dystopian world, just focus purely on that for paragraph number 1. Paragraph number 2, we're staying in the dystopian world, but this time we're looking at our character. So focusing purely on them. We've shown the reader the world around the character. Then we're going to come in to the character themselves. And we've got to think about giving some information to the reader. Things like possibly, why are they there? Why is our character there? What has happened to them? What do they need to do in this particular location, in this dystopian world? And most importantly, how are they feeling right now? And what are their senses experiencing? Now, the reason I kind of go quite heavy in on trying to use the senses when doing creative writing is because we all have the majority of the senses. Sure, like not everyone has all 5 senses, but like we all understand the concept of these senses. So we can use them in our writing to really help make the texture of the world more like interesting and sort of exciting and easier to absorb for the reader to kind of get into that world by using our senses, because they can relate often to a lot of those senses. So use the senses. Okay, that's paragraph 1 and 2. Now everything is about to change. Paragraph 1, setting, dystopian world. Paragraph 2, character in this dystopian world. Now everything is going to change because paragraph 3, we are going to move away from the dystopian world and we're going to go back to a memory of the normal world, or like the perfect world, the world we had before everything turned bad. So here, the character is going to have a memory which leads them back into a flashback of the world before the disaster, whatever it was. By doing this, we're going to be shifting the tone of our story. It's going to allow us to fully relate our story to the question, which I'll come back to. And we're going to be using this paragraph 3, to describe the normal world now around the character back in their memory. So why are we having this flashback? Well, first of all, it's a structure technique. Using a flashback is a structure technique. So immediately this structure builds in a technique that you will get a mark for. That's number 1. Flashbacks are really interesting because if you can create a juxtaposition between the two worlds that flashback sort of like moves us to. We've got the dystopian world in paragraph 1 and 2, which is dark and dingy and grey and bleak and torturous and horrible, miserable, right? But then we have this flashback where we can create a much more positive, lighter tone before the world goes bad. And we can kind of completely shift the energy, which is going to show skill, because it's going to show them that we can write something dark and miserable, but then we can also write with a happy, joyful, more pleasant tone. So we're showing a lot of skill in doing that. And yeah, it just works. And the other thing is as well, you can use that flashback to really relate to the question. So if the question is about write a story in which you've found something, right? Well, paragraph 1 and paragraph 2, our dystopian setting, doesn't need to focus on finding something because we're still setting up the world. But we can then have a flashback about a time in the normal world where we found something. And then the real skill is then integrating that back into the end of the story, what you found, moving it back into the final paragraph, which I'll come on to when we get there. So using this flashback gives us techniques. It allows us to shift the tone and the energy, show off some variety of skills, and it allows us to insert any question. Because think about it, regardless of the question, you can always put that in a flashback. No reason why a flashback determines what you can say or what you can write about and what you can't write about. So use the flashback to bring the question into it. Paragraph number 4, we're still in the normal world, okay? Because we flashed back from dystopian. We're still in the normal world in paragraph 4. This time we're going to focus in on the character or whatever it is that needs to happen in the flashback in order to relate to the question. So remember, paragraph 3 in the normal world was the setting, but paragraph 4, we're going into the character. Now, you might have noticed paragraph 1 was on the setting, paragraph 2 was on the character. Doing the same again, now we're in the flashback. First paragraph of the flashback, paragraph 3, was in the dystopian world looking at the was in the normal world looking at the setting. Second paragraph of the flashback, paragraph 4, was on the character. So we're using the same template. Setting, then character, setting, then character. And when we're in the normal world in that flashback, on that character paragraph, paragraph 4, we're just going to do the same exercise that we did on paragraph 2, which is, why are they there? What do they have to do in this memory? How are they feeling? What are their senses experiencing? All of the kind of stuff that we know is going to help a reader get engaged in this part of the story. We're just going to replicate that. Use the question to tell you what you need to write about in this flashback moment. That's super important. You'll see in an example from a student in a moment. Paragraph 5, our final paragraph. I always say you only need to do 5 paragraphs. That's it. 5 paragraphs is enough to get full marks. Trust me. Paragraph 5, the final one, we're going to come back into the dystopian world. So we've had our flashback, we're coming back into the dystopian world, and we're just going to focus on the character. Because think about it, we don't need to do the setting of the dystopian world again. We did that in paragraph 1. Instead, we're going to focus in on our character, and we're going to think about the character and what they reflect on having had this emotional flashback, like how they're feeling now that they've had this really intense memory where they've relived it. That's an important thing to know. What's the difference between a memory and a flashback? Well, a memory is something sort of casual or short, or something that doesn't need to be particularly detailed. You might just remember something. A flashback is to relive it. It's to almost live that moment again, that memory, but as if it's happening in real time, to almost be pulled or sucked back into that one moment from the past. And that's why we've got a couple of paragraphs in that flashback, so we can go into detail and really relive it, or have our character relive it. So really try and focus on what are they now feeling coming out of this flashback, and how has that flashback emotionally affected them. So I've got this picture of a picture frame here, right? So some people find this quite useful to kind of visualize when I describe this structure. If you imagine, if you go into a shop and they sell picture frames, you might have loads and loads of picture frames. Someone could come in, or 2 people could come in and buy exactly the same picture frame, and they're identical. It's just a frame. It's just a frame, and it's identical. It becomes theirs. It becomes unique to those 2 people when they each take it home and they put their picture in it. Suddenly, it's not just a picture frame. It's now a picture which is framed. Now, use that to imagine what we're doing here. We are building a framework in which to put a flashback, a story that the question is asking us to write about. The frame is paragraph 1 and 2 and a bit of paragraph 5. Paragraph 4 and 5 is whatever the question is going to ask us to do. So that's why I came up with this idea of like a picture frame. We are putting a picture into a frame that we've already pre-built. So we're going into this exam already knowing what paragraph 1 and paragraph 2 are. Doesn't matter what the question is. If the question is like, okay, so a lot of people ask me this. They're like, oh, but Nick, hold on. My paragraph 1 and 2 are like bleak and barren and miserable and sad. But what if the question asks me to write a story about my happiest moment? It's not gonna work if my paragraph 1 and 2 is in a dystopian world, which is sad and horrible. But that's what the flashback's for. And that is the brilliant shift in tone that you're creating. It starts off barren and bleak and miserable, but then we really go to town on that question in paragraph 3 and 4 with a joyful memory of whatever it is. And so we've shown a real nice juxtaposition there, another technique which we've done. So you really can put anything in this flashback. You can put anything in the picture frame and get yourself marks from the question. So just some ideas of what a dystopian world might visually look like. Here we've got, if we have a look, we've got sort of rubble. The buildings are kind of destroyed. The sky is red, and it kind of feels a little bit decayed. It feels like the world is sort of destroyed. In this picture, the second one, we've got some branches, some trees, and they look lifeless. They look dead. It's almost like nature has died in this world. So that's what I mean about it being barren and bleak. We want that. We want that because it's going to give us a really nice emotional shift later on in the story when we get to our flashback. Sky is red. It's cloudy. It kind of looks really gothic and dark. Really good stuff. Love those two pictures. If you like them, obviously just pause the video or rewatch the video if you're going to do a practice of this, which I'd highly recommend. Okay, so what senses could we get from these images potentially? Here's some examples. Sound. What could they hear in this dystopian world? Maybe it's the sound of strong, uncontrollable gusts of howling wind, or maybe it's eerily silent. Maybe there's no sounds, no birds, no people, no cars. It's kind of deathly silent. Maybe we hear the slamming of doors and windows from the wind, maybe a tree falling in the distance. I don't know, it could be whatever you want it to be, but those are some examples. Sight, obviously just use the pictures, describe what we see in those pictures. That would be your sense of sight. Touch. I would suggest making the characters barefoot, because if they're barefoot and they're stood in this world, we don't need to write them touching anything to get the sense of touch. They already are touching something through their feet because they're barefoot. So it could be like the feeling of hard, dry soil, maybe like kind of going in between their toes and getting scratchy and itchy. I don't know, it could be whatever you want, making it up. Could be broken, sharp concrete because we've seen that all the buildings are destroyed and everything like that. Maybe we feel sharp, cold skin, like scratching the exposed skin. Sharp, cold wind exposing the skin. A bit of rhyme there. Smell. Maybe they smell rotting food or even people or animals. Maybe there's the smell of burning rubber or metal or sewage. We can get really into this dystopian world when we use the senses and we just kind of close our eyes and almost imagine for a moment what everything would feel like and look like and all those senses if we were in this kind of destroyed and decayed world. Taste is quite a difficult one, actually. So the best way I've found of working in taste on this particular setting is maybe like the bitterness of ash or pollution, or maybe like if they have a drink of water, because in a dystopian destroyed world there's no clean water, so it might be metallic from broken pipes where the water's been going through and stuff like that. Kind of really gross, but yeah, that could work as well. And feelings, no feelings isn't a sense, but they're really important to get across. It could be the feelings of loneliness, sadness, feeling depressed, feeling fearful because they're in this world. Again, if we get a question on write about the happiest moment of your life, don't worry about it. We've got the flashback in order to really bring that to life. Okay, so here's an example. Now, at the top, you can see it says, write a story with the title A New Beginning. And this was a past paper question from AQA. Can't remember what year it was off the top of my head. 2019. I don't know. I would be guessing. I can't remember. But here's the thing, right? This is a true story. I wrote this with someone called Lucy. And I didn't give her the question. I didn't give her a question when we started writing this. I just gave her all the information I've just given you. And I said to her, right, write me 2 paragraphs, one on the setting, set in a dystopian world, and then one on the character, set in a dystopian world. No question, no title, just write me 2 paragraphs. And here's what she wrote. As I drag myself through the blackened and desolate land, the cruel heat beats down on me. Love that imagery of the cruel heat. Blistering my skin. Really nice description. The ground beneath my feet is littered with sharp rocks and glass, each step slicing through, a painful reminder of the emptiness surrounding me. Lifeless trees stand like twisted guards, nice simile, their skeletal branches reaching up to the smoke-filled sky. Buildings once filled with life now lie in ruins. Their hollow windows staring out like empty eyes, bit of personification and simile, seemingly watching me. Nice simple sentence there for effect, almost making the character feel like they're very vulnerable in this world. Very smart. The air, thick with smoke, casts a dark red hue. You can tell she's used those images that I showed you guys over everything, obscuring any glimpse of sun. There is no life, no hope, no sound. Simple sentences, anaphora, repetition of no at the beginning of consecutive clauses, except for the occasional crackling of distant fires. That's her paragraph 1. I tell you what she did for her exam. She just learnt that. probably not off by heart, but she learned all like her similes and the personification. She will have learned her description and just done that as soon as she got into answering the creative writing section. Already knows what she's writing, doesn't even really need to plan it in her head, saving all of that time, doesn't need to stop and think, she's already got it written out. This is the benefit of doing this exercise. It gives you stuff to start with straight away as soon as you get in there. Paragraph 2. Now we're going to be going into the character, remember. I am here because there is nowhere else to go. Another thing, I like that she's writing in first person, so using I. I always recommend to my students, write your story in first person. Why? I think it's easier to become engaged in it. If you think about it with third person, we are detached from the character. We, viewing them, we're detached from them. So it can be a little bit harder, particularly in a very short amount of time, which you've got to write your story in the exam. It can be very hard to kind of feel emotionally attached to them. So if you write in first person, it makes the reader feel like they are in the story. So it's much easier to place themselves in this world. I'm here because there's nowhere else to go. Something terrible has happened, leaving this once thriving place like a shadow of its old self. Nice metaphor simile there. The need to survive drives me forward. Another simple sentence. Oh no, it's not comma. Though with each breath, it feels as though I am swallowing flames. Ooh, another good simile there. Searing my throat. Notice this vocabulary, searing. Think about the repetition of this idea of burning and like pain as well. Very, very good for this dystopian world. My skin burns, not just from the relentless heat, but from the gusts of wind that scorch me. Again, semantic field of burning. Very good for Marx. I can taste the bitter smoke on my tongue. I feel it coating my throat with each laboured breath. There, she's bringing in the sense of taste. My senses are overwhelmed by the complete emptiness of this place, the darkness pressing me in from all sides, nice metaphor, suffocating me in its grip, nice personification. Yet, I push on, driven by an instinct to keep moving, to find some sign of hope in this bleak existence. Great, that's her paragraph 1 and 2. That will be exactly what she wrote in her GCSE paper. No matter what the question was, she was writing that. As I stood amidst the rubble of the city, its towering buildings now remain against the blood-red sky, I caught my reflection in a shattered window. My bony face stared back at me, a ghostly reminder of the life I once knew. Clutching a crumpled photograph of my baby sister and me, tears blurred the image of innocence and joy. Now, she's using a picture to get her into the flashback, as you'll see in a moment. I really recommend that. I really recommend your character having a picture on them. We don't reference it in paragraph 1 and 2, but it's going to help us get into the flashback, because when they look at the picture, they're going to almost be like absorbed, or almost the character's going to be sucked into that picture and relive whatever was on that picture. It's a really, really good idea. And here we are, we're into the flashback. So remember, the question was a new beginning. This was the moment I gave her that question, a new beginning. So you're going to see she's going to start using a new beginning, because remember, in the real exam, if you use this structure, you're not going to know what the question is, but you don't even need to look at the question when you start doing paragraph 1 and 2. It doesn't matter what the question is, because you're just going to do what you've already pre-written. Suddenly, the desolate world around me melted away, replaced by a distant memory. I could smell the sterile hospital air mingled with hope and fear as I stood outside the glass doors, my heart pounding like a relentless drumbeat. Using the senses, nice simile. With trembling hands, I pushed open the door, stepping into a world of white walls and whispers. Nice alliteration and metaphor. There she lay, my sister, tiny and delicate. Tubes and wires snaked around her tiny body, a lifeline tethering her to this world. Nice metaphor. Lovely description as well. But amidst the beeping machines and sterile surroundings, nice sibilance, her innocence shone like a beacon of light in the darkness. Now, the reason I underlined light there is because I feel there's the beginning of this title starting to come through, a new beginning. If you think about it here, she's writing this story about her baby sister who's just been born into the world that is a new beginning. Obviously, it's a new life. Very, very clever. As I gazed at her innocent face, I felt a wave of determination wash over me. Her life was a new beginning. Subtly using the title there from the question. A sign of hope in a world filled with uncertainty. In her tiny form, I saw the promise of a better tomorrow, not just for her, but for all of us. With her arrival, my purpose became clear: to protect her, to nurture her, to ensure that she would never have to face the darkness alone. Nice juxtaposition between darkness and light. Nice anaphora, repeating that wording at the beginning of consecutive phrases. Her light could bring a new... Oh no, I skipped a bit. And as I held her tiny hand in mine, I knew that together we would change the world. A new beginning. Her light could bring a new meaning to the world, and with it the dawn of a beginning, the dawn of beginning. Nice metaphor, and using the key word from the question there. A searing hot gust of wind swept past me. We're back into the dystopian world. This is her final paragraph, remember. It tore through my senses, burning me inside. With a gasp, I looked down at the crumpled photograph, now soaked in tears and ash. Lovely description. The smell of burning mingled with memories of sterile hospital rooms. Oh, poetry. Great metaphor. Mingled with memories, lovely alliteration, love everything about it. Yet in this new world of chaos and despair, I found a strange sense of clarity. The ashes of the past gave way to a new beginning. Here, among the ruins, I discovered strength I never knew I possessed. Resolve, burning brighter, nice alliteration, than any flame, nice metaphor. Among chaos, I found purpose. My sister's memory guided me, driving me forward through the darkness. With each step, I vowed to carve out a new path, to build a world where her innocence could thrive once more. Here, I found my new beginning. So the reason I wanted to use that as an example is, first of all, I think the writing's great, and I hope you agree. I'm sure you will agree. I think she's... And here's the thing, right? She hated creative writing. I can tell you that right now. She hated it. She felt she couldn't do it. She felt like she didn't have any imagination. And I said to her, let's go through this exercise where we're just going to create this dystopian world. Try and be descriptive, try and do show, don't tell. This is kind of what's inspired me to cover this topic in this video. It's because I know it works. I can't tell you how much she hated doing creative writing. But then in the end, once she had written this and she read it back and she thought, yeah, I kind of enjoyed it. I kind of liked it. If you enjoy writing it, we, the examiner, will enjoy reading it. Because it will be translated in the tone and the passion you put into it. Like, we will enjoy reading it, trust me. I love the way she wrote this, and I think the way she integrated the question into her dystopian world, I thought was brilliant. She used the flashback to get her to what the topic of the question was, a new beginning. And here she used actually a real life story of hers. The little baby sister in the hospital used this real memory actually from her own life, but put it into her character's life. If you've got a particular memory, or, you know, you like use your own memories as well, you know, because you lived them. So it's kind of like going back to the beginning when I was talking about visualizing the film, the movie of the scene, and then writing the scene. It's kind of like that, but you've actually lived it. You don't need to create a film in your head to then write. You've lived it. You can see the scene in your head because you lived it. So I think she integrated the question really well. And, you know, I don't think there is anyone who would look at the paragraph 1 and 2 and say, well, you can't get any marks for that because it's got nothing to do with a new beginning. But she needed paragraph 1 and 2 in order to get the payoff for the title A New Beginning when she introduced her baby sister about halfway. So all I'm doing with paragraph 1 and 2, you know, the first like 1/3 of our story, yeah, sure, it might not have necessarily anything to do with the question. I think actually if she would have written this, if she'd have written paragraph 1 and 2, but I'd have already shown in the question, which is what would have happened. Well, in the exam, you'll have pre-written paragraph 1 and 2, right? That's what I'm suggesting you do. But you'll still see the question before you start writing paragraph 1 and 2, even though you know what you're going to write. Well, you can still integrate a bit of the question in there. And I think if I would have shown her that title, A New Beginning, I still think she would have integrated it into paragraph 1 and 2, even though she's already written it. She'll just find a couple of sentences that she could maybe reference it. So I'm not necessarily saying ignore the question for paragraph 1 and 2. What I'm saying is let's practice writing a world that is inherently interesting, the dystopian world. Let's focus on the senses and really bring our reader into the world by talking about the character's senses. And then the flashback gives us creative license. We can go wherever we need in a flashback because we don't need to stay in our original world. That is why the flashback works. I mentioned a little bit earlier about those past paper questions from edXL, that there were 20 of them. I think it was 20. Yeah, these are literally past paper questions. I cut these out from the past paper questions. So for example, like let's look at number 4. Write about a time when you or someone you know did something without thinking it through. Okay, well, paragraph 1 and 2 is going to be in our dystopian world. They're going to have a flashback to a moment when someone did something. It could be, you could even make it the reason why we live in a dystopian world. You could write a story about a scientist, and in their flashback, they remember when they accidentally pressed the button and the world ended or whatever. Now, remember, you don't want to tell a huge, long, epic story, only a tiny little short moment of their life. So you might not want to talk about the aftermath to how we got here now, but you could use the flashback potentially to maybe kind of reference why we live in this dystopian world, just as an example. But you could literally put whatever you want about someone doing something without thinking something through in that flashback. No problem. Write about your most treasured memory. Number 8. Boom. Like, yeah. Treasured memory is in the flashback. Write about a childhood friendship. Number 10. Great. A memory you have of your best friend. Maybe on the photograph. In the dystopian world, it's you and your best friend, and you have that memory of them. Easy. Number 14, write about a secret. Cool, we start in a dystopian world. We have a picture of something that has a moment where you remembered keeping a secret. You then flash back into that moment, how it felt to have that secret, not telling that person whatever it was, and now you'll never get an opportunity to, because we're in this dystopian world and they're gone. And then we can integrate that back into paragraph 5. Oh, it works every time. I love it. It's the dream. It works. So I would recommend, okay, going through the video. You can stop and start it. You can have a look at that example from Lucy as well. Really study it, almost do like language analysis on it, language and structure analysis, kind of like I was doing as I was reading it out. Like, you know, really try and study, what did she do that worked? Why did you like what she did? If you liked it, hopefully you did. I'm sure you did. Have a look at these pictures and practice it. Practice paragraph 1 and 2. And also go onto a past paper. I mean, there was 20 there from edXL, but go onto your exam board if you want. They all ask the same style of question really for creative writing. But anyway, you can go on your exam board, find a past paper, look at a question, and then go, right, I'm going to write a flashback for that question. And I bet you £10,000 you will be able to integrate that question into a flashback, having already written your paragraph 1 and 2. And actually your paragraph 5 as well, potentially. But the thing is with pre-writing paragraph 5 is that you want to use the flashback. You want to use the kind of the memory of having the flashback into your paragraph 5. So really it's just called paragraph 1 and 2 that we're pre-writing. But I want you to practice writing loads and loads of past paper flashbacks, because you never know when you will get a question where one of your already written flashbacks is going to work, because we know they always work, just depends on the topic of the question. That's going to save you a huge amount of time in the exam. And remember what I said earlier, it's like storing a library of stories that you can then use in your creative writing, and you just guarantee yourself marks. You'll take loads of pressure off. You've already practiced it. You've edited it as well at home over your kind of revision time. You've been creative. You've been showing, not telling. You could just use all of that. One of those flashbacks that works, just put it in on the day. You've got so much less to worry about. So there we go. My strategy to helping you get better marks at creative writing. Trust me, I've been doing it, as I said, for 2 or 3 years, and it's worked every single time. And I've done this with people, believe me, who hated creative writing. I promise you, they hated it, and they ended up coming out with phenomenal creative writing marks. So do try it. Let me know in the comments how it worked. Honestly, I kind of love this thing that I sort of came up with because I know it works. So yeah, if you try it with the school exercise, let me know in the comments if it worked, or if you have any questions about it. Like, again, like put them in the comments. And if you stuck around this long, I mean, you're an absolute trooper. But yeah, if you did stick around this long, please do leave a like on the channel, on the video, and subscribe to the channel, because I've got so many of these tips that I'm going to be giving out. So yeah, share it with a friend as well if you found it useful. If you know someone who is terrible at creative writing and they always talk about how they hate that part of whenever a teacher gets them to do it, send them this video and be like, yeah, just check this out, because this, I promise you, will work. Give it a go. Let me know how it goes, and I'll see you in the next one.